Hillsborough County has launched its redesigned website, hcfl.gov. The new domain boasts a variety of improvements to searchability, page layout, navigation, and website speed. The revamped website features robust search functions, making it easier for users to find the information they need. Whether searching for essential government services, paying water bills, accessing event information, learning how to acquire a new trash can, or identifying evacuation zones, the enhanced search functionality ensures quick access to relevant content. HCFL.gov's new design features a clean, modern, and intuitive layout. The streamlined design enhances user-friendliness for easy navigation and access to important resources. Navigating the website is now more straightforward than ever. Users can seamlessly move between different sections, departments, and services while interacting with information and resources. Ready to see what all the fuss is about? Head to hcfl.gov and discover your best source for all things Hillsborough County.
Tampa Bay is like no place else.
Wait, you can't recycle the bag. You have to throw it away.
Proper recycling keeps it that way for everyone. Bags tangle in machinery and can bring sorting efforts to a halt.
No bags.
Trash the bags and keep our recycling program moving forward.
No, Mom, look. No plastic bags.
Do your part to keep our recycling bag-free. Trash the tanglers or return them to participating retailers. For more information, visit tampabayrecycles.org.
These are the jobs you may not see every day, but just know we're working hard to make Hillsborough County a better place to live, work, and play. Subscribe to our YouTube page for more great county-related videos, only on HTV.
Psst, hey, would you do me a favor? Grab your phone or smart device and open up that camera. Then point it right here at the QR code. Do you have it? I'll wait a second. When you see the link pop up on your screen, give it a tap. You ready? Boom! Welcome to the Hillsborough County official YouTube channel. We've got all sorts of videos here, all about what makes our community such an awesome place. From local events and community highlights to what's in the perfect Cuban sandwich. We've got it all. We're always adding new things, so while you're here, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss a new video. Here's that QR code again, just in case you missed it. Go ahead and check it out. Ooh. This must have fallen out of that video. This really is the perfect Cuban sandwich.
Good afternoon and welcome to the March 27, 2024 Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners Budget Workshop. Before I pass things over to the County Administrator for opening remarks, I want to say that Commissioner Kemp's running a few minutes late, but will be in attendance. So with that, Bonnie, you want to introduce today's agenda?
Yes, thank you very much. And good afternoon, Commissioners. This is the first of 3 budget workshops that are already scheduled before the County Administrator, before I deliver the budget on July 17th, and that will be at your regular board meeting. This workshop will provide an overview of the budget, including how funding is allocated amongst the budget as a whole, as well as our 2 general funds, the countywide general fund and the unincorporated area general fund. These are the 2 funds where you as the board have the most discretion in spending. This workshop provides an overview. As I mentioned, it is an early step in the budget process. As you'll see in the timetable, there are several more workshops on the calendar, and we welcome your feedback on the suggested topics. At a high level, we anticipate taxable value growth on a percentage basis for the fiscal year 25 budget year will be lower than it has been in the last 10 years. This, combined with a flattening of sales tax revenue, will provide a challenging budget process for fiscal year 25, especially when considered in connection with the certain critical needs that we have here at Hillsborough County. We know that critical needs include public safety and transportation infrastructure, and we're looking for ways to address those crucial issues. Although I mentioned that the taxable value is less than it has been, the increase is less than it has been in the past 10 years, it still is in a positive category. As we prepare the recommended budget for your consideration, we will use our general set of guiding principles, which include adopting a structurally balanced budget with recurring revenues matching the recurring expenditures, using restricted funds first, maintain county infrastructure and equipment, preserve our service levels, and invest in our valued county employees. After Kevin provides the overview, I'll make a brief presentation regarding municipal bonds, including comparing bonding projects versus funding them on a pay-as-you-go basis. And this analysis was requested by Commissioner Owen at your last board meeting. And it is intended to provide information to help you for decision-making at your April 3rd board meeting. This is a workshop, no votes will be taken. This is for information. And so now we can turn it over to Kevin to provide the overview.
Good afternoon, Kevin.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you. Kevin Brickey, Management and Budget. So as Bonnie mentioned, I'll be giving the brief overview of the budget. We'll be talking at first, looking at some high-level reminders about the structure of the budget, then looking at some cost and revenue expectations, and then some FY25 issues. Every year when we start the budget, we're reminded that we have received the Government Finance Officers Association Award since 1986, and we continue to strive to do that. The adopted budget is just over $9 billion, and when looking at the operating budget across all funds, the operating budget is about $3.6 billion, and 49% of that is within those first 4 bars: sheriff, fire rescue, so public service, enterprise funds, water, wastewater, solid waste, and healthcare services. Turning to the area where the board has the most discretion, looking at our 2 general funds, first of all, the countywide general fund. This is the fund that serves all residents of the county, whether they're in the incorporated area or one of the 3 cities, and it provides services that the cities don't provide. Part of the sheriff's budget is there, primarily the jail operations. Then the other constitutionals are primarily in the countywide general fund as well: the clerk, the supervisor, tax collector, and property appraiser. Also, there's human services, social services, medical examiner, pet resources, all things that the board provides to all residents of the county. Right now, the operating millage for the property tax in that area in countywide is just over 5.73 mils. The FY24 operating budget is about $1.4 billion. 55.5% of that amount is to the constitutional officers and other outside agencies. The sheriff is the largest. Again, that's primarily jail and court operations. Turning to the unincorporated area fund, another area where the board has greater discretion, this is the fund that the board provides services to unincorporated area residents, the kind of services that a city would provide within its own city limits. So law enforcement operations, policing, fire rescue, parks, public works. And we'll talk about millage rates in a moment. In this fund, about 71% of the operating dollars in this fund is public safety, fire rescue and sheriff. The other areas that I talked about are a good bit smaller, 71% in public safety. The board provides these services to the unincorporated area at a millage rate that's a good bit lower than the three cities. The board's millage rate in the unincorporated area is a little bit more than 4.37. The cities range anywhere from about 5.7 to 6.2 mills. The unincorporated area is an area where we continue to be challenged by population growth and the service demands that come along with that. Certainly with fire rescue, we've talked about that for some time. The need for new fire stations. The chief and fire rescue have also brought forth new ideas and initiatives looking at rescue and being able to perhaps use those other initiatives to also improve response times. That does come with some cost that we will be building into the budget. Law enforcement, the sheriff is experiencing the same sort of thing with stresses on response time and population growth. The sheriff has indicated that his office will need to be increasing staffing in upcoming years, so we expect to be able, or we expect to have some requests from the sheriff's office in that vein. And then, of course, transportation and parks continue to be a challenge in the unincorporated area. The capital improvement program, it's about $1.6 billion. More than half of that is in the water enterprise and in transportation. The 12 large capital improvement programs, excess of $1 million, is dominated by transportation and public safety. Our revenues, $3.8 billion of mainly recurring revenues. 40% of that is in property taxes. We continue to have the board's policy regarding reserves in the general funds to be between 20 and 25%. That also is a rate or a portion that bond rating agencies look at. The county does have a AAA rating from the three bond rating agencies. They look for that amount. A 1% change in reserves is about $17.3 million. About $11 million of that is countywide and $6 is unincorporated, proportionally. Looking at positions, county administrator positions are about, in FY24, about 6,100. That has increased some in recent years, but it is still below the peak of FY07 at 6,600. The recent rise is due to increases in fire rescue positions. The board has funded new fire rescue stations and the related staffing that goes along with that. There has been an increase of about 30% in those positions. But county administrator positions net of fire rescue are still down compared to FY07, about 800. As Bonnie mentioned, we are expecting a little bit of a change for the upcoming budget, FY25, in the rate of growth in taxable values. Taxable values, of course, are important. Taxable values of property. That combined with a millage rate that the board sets, then that determines what our property tax revenues are. In the last 2 years, it's been double digit, 15% in FY23, 11.5% for this year. We do expect it to be about 5.5%. Mortgage rates have Higher mortgage rates have certainly slowed the housing market and other markets. And so we do expect to be somewhere around that 20-year average of about 5.5 to 5.7%. This is just looking at a graph of taxable values over time. You do see the dip during the Great Recession. It did take about 11 years to surpass the previous peak. Looking a little bit at, and Bonnie did mention also that we expect sales tax revenues to be relatively flat. That would be our state shared sales taxes, which is important to our general funds. So we are looking at a somewhat constrained rate of growth in our revenues for FY25, but we're also still experiencing cost pressures as well. This graph is looking at inflation, consumer inflation over a number of years. It did peak above 9%. It's down to about 3.2, which still is high compared to what the Federal Reserve's target of 2% is. And it's still impacting operations here at the county, particularly when you look at electricity, commodity prices, vehicles, equipment prices. Insurance premiums have been greatly affected. I know my personal insurance premiums have been affected. Capital construction costs continue to rise at a large clip. And it also continues to keep wage pressure, upward wage pressure in the economy. Bonnie mentioned these guiding principles that we look at with every budget, where we look to have a structurally balanced budget where recurring revenues and recurring expenditures match, maintaining reserves, maintaining our assets, capital infrastructure, maintaining current service levels, and investing in county employees who make it all work. So looking at FY25 considerations, did mention slower ad valorem growth, 5.5%. Early indications for the property appraiser are about 4%. Tends to be a little conservative at this time, so we expect it to be a little bit more. But every year, we always look at constitutional requests, mandates from the state, contractual mandates such as union contracts, other market price adjustments, looking at department requests, capital equipment replacements, and so on. So then there are other FY25 considerations out there that we're looking at and considering. Of course, there's the CIT, Community Investment Tax Renewal. Fire rescue is always on our minds. Here we have the alternative service delivery proposals that Fire Rescue and the chief brought to you recently. Again, those will have some cost impact. New and replacement fire stations are still always out there. Looking at solid waste assessments and issues related to that. Hauler contract prices are going up, recycling costs rising, and then there is capital improvements that are needed in the system, such as the resource recovery, the transfer station, and landfill issues as well. We have a tentative workshop for solid waste assessments in April. We also have a tentative workshop regarding the Indigent Healthcare Fund, which I'll talk about a little bit more momentarily. And another consideration is thinking about a millage swap. This is looking at the Indigent Healthcare Tax Fund, surtax fund. This tax is currently 0.5%. It was adopted as 0.5% in 1992. It was decreased to 0.25% in 1997 and then went back to 0.5% in October of 2001. In recent years, the reserve balance has increased pretty strongly as revenues have, sales tax revenues have been very strong. And there was a slight decrease in the intensity of usage of the plan immediately following the pandemic, which is starting to reverse. But with that in mind, and looking at possible topics for that tentative workshop as to how to serve that population and how to look at the larger balances, these are some suggested strategies that might be targeted to that. One is looking at paying inmate health care, those in our jails, using that fund. The sheriff is working with healthcare services to look at that. That would benefit also the countywide general fund because it's currently paid from the countywide general fund through the amount of dollars going to the sheriff. Another area, similarly looking at the services that fire rescue provides that also could be attributed to the indigent population. That would benefit the unincorporated area general fund. But those are some topics that could be on that. It's not an exhaustive list. Looking at millage swap. Here is an example of 3 millage swaps. They're even millage swaps. So 1 mill is a $1 tax per $1,000 of taxable value. 1/10 of a mill, it would be an even millage swap, down countywide by 1/10, up unincorporated by 1/10. But it's not an even dollar swap because the countywide millage, of course, applies also to the cities, properties in the cities. That would be a decline countywide of $15.7 million, an increase unincorporated of $9.3 million. So there'd be a net loss of about $6.4 million, but we would have to pay attention to the 15.7 loss in the countywide fund and accommodate that. If one were to go to a 1/4 mill, it would be a rather large decrease countywide of $39 million for a increase unincorporated of about $23 million. $40 million would be an area where we would have service impacts. Now, how would that look on a house of $350,000? Depends on whether or not it's in the unincorporated area or in one of the 3 cities. If it's in the unincorporated area at 1/10 of a mill, countywide tax would go down by 30. Unincorporated tax would go up by 30, net wash to 0. But if it was one of the 3 cities, remember the countywide millage applies within the cities, it would be a $30 decrease to this house within the cities. But in the unincorporated area, if you're in the cities, it doesn't apply. So it would be a net decline of $30 for a house in one of the 3 cities. And then a brief look at the calendar. Bonnie mentioned we had some tentative topics for workshops. Of course, today is March 27th, the budget overview. April 24th, solid waste assessments. May 8th, indigent health care fund. Those are the suggestions currently. The board can certainly add more if it desires. We'll get better and more firm property appraiser taxable value numbers, early ones in June, and a more solid figure on July 1st. As usual, Bonnie will deliver her recommended budget to you in mid-July. In late July, July 31st, you'll have your budget reconciliation public hearing where you set trim and discuss other priorities you may have. And then finally in September, the 2 required public hearings by state law, and you'll finally adopt the budget on September 21. With that,
All right, any questions or comments for Kevin on the budget overview? Commissioner Wilson?
Thank you. On the budget swap, I have a few questions. But on the budget swap, we could reasonably develop a plan to say that if we only went with the 0.175, we could look at that as a Thank you. We could look at that as a multi-year step, though, right? Instead of us doing one big hard hit of $40 million, we could do planning, and if we came to an understanding at the board and said that we wanted to do 0.175, we could shift 16.4 million for the first year, and then potentially slightly greater if we did it year 2, as we're planning to phase down some of the countywide spending as we phase up some of the unincorporated, which would be huge for the 2 single-member districts that represent the majority of the unincorporated area, especially since that's where so many of our road repaving needs are. On the capital improvement program, page
page, there's a line item that says repaving of $65 million. Is that us suggesting that we're at 65 annually out of the 90 million estimated? That, because I didn't believe we had fulfilled the repaving dollars to that.
Some of that is carryover dollars from previous years.
Okay.
So it's not a $65 million infusion of new money.
Do you happen to know right now where we're at on fully funding? That is one of my goals before I leave here, is to fully fund the annual repaving of about 90 million. I know it grows every year. So do we know what number? I know that we put substantially more into that fund than was in there the previous year, but do we know what percentage we're funded at?
Well, in the last couple of years, the board was able to put some ARP dollars in there. Of course, that's one-time dollars.
No. Yeah, just funding it as of last year. How much general funds did we put in there?
I believe we put in an additional $10 million of unincorporated funds in there.
So yeah, I mean, that's a hurdle that we have to seriously start as we unbind and consider these swaps. That's another one of those things that we have to keep in mind is reaching a point that we fully fund the repaving fund for the unincorporated area. I think that that's a significant thing. Another thing, board members, I've brought this up before, and I really hope this year you guys can, this is a simple one, I hope you can get behind fixing. I've had to talk state legislatures off the edge because we're not transparent in this main page 4 that shows a total conglomerate of the two budgets. It misrepresents how much the sheriff's department gets. And some of the state's legislatures see it and they say, well, why are you giving the sheriff $600 million and you're only giving fire rescue the $200 million? Because the sheriff doesn't have to do the county the favor, as we found out in Pasco recently, of managing the corrections facility. He does an exceptional job. I don't understand all the reasons that the Pasco sheriff decided to do that, but now that it's no longer in the Pasco sheriff's budget, it's going to be represented as what, judicial or just county, which is what it really is. It's not part of the sheriff's actual budget, which is what people think of the sheriff as enforcing laws day in and day out and patrolling the neighborhood. So I really believe that we should change that bucket of money to more accurately represent this is what the sheriff is doing for generalized sheriff's duties, and this is what he's doing as a favor to the county in terms of providing judicial services, courthouse services, whatever you want to define it as. So it seems superficial, but when there are other powers that be that are looking at how we're operating and their willingness to help us with on things, I think that unfairly misrepresents the amount of money that the sheriff gets annually. Is something that we should fix. You all know my desires on the tax swap. It was my idea on the last go around. I think that for the District 2 and 4 commissioners, we really need to look at what we wrap our mind around as economic development in the countywide budget. If we believe that funding for a couple of years some major roadways that are dilapidated and fallen behind, if that in itself is not an economic development aspiration, more so than what that department may or may not be doing, and do we need to look at turning down those offerings for a little while as we turn up other needs? Needs change, so that's something I think that we need to consider. I'm sure there will be other options. I want to figure out on the countywide funds, I think it said all other departments, other support departments. Am I going to find, or maybe you can just point me to specifically in the budget where it will more granularly define what that's going to be?
There's a couple of pages in the budget that look at funding in that fund by department. So it's going to be things like HR, management, budget, things like that.
Okay. As under other supports or HR, and I'll just get with you on finding what those budgets are. And finally, I'll just close with saying, in terms of the indigent healthcare fund page, I think that there's some important things that at least the two new commissioners with me need to understand about this tax. When it was, I think the word was adopted, the taxpayers of Hillsborough County did not adopt that 0.5% tax. This tax is unique to any other tax in the entire state of Florida. In fact, we're the only county that taxes the citizens locally without their permission. This tax uniquely was done from an effort of in my opinion, socialist at the time that got the state to change a state law to add words in there since they couldn't get the support of their general electorate. They got them to add in language that allowed them to tax their citizens without their knowledge or permission. So when we say that it was adopted at 0.5%, which is what makes us the third highest sales tax county in the entire state of Florida, the citizens have not ever had a voice about taxing themselves in this manner. This is 33 years old now that they have never had the opportunity to tax themselves, for one. Two, in 1997, the county and those commissioners didn't, out of an act of kindness or good management, decide to reduce the tax by 50% to 0.25%. They were forced by the Florida State Senate to do it because, as you can see, at that time, just as we have now, they mismanaged the budget to the point that they had they had double the amount of reserves that they were taking in a single year, which is about where we're at again at this point. And while I am a huge supporter of praising in public and punishing in private, unfortunately, sunshine laws don't afford us that opportunity, and certain things have to be said. And because of the way that this budget has been managed, I am now questioning my comfort level in our management team's ability to perform their job in the way that I expect. So I really appreciate all the information that was offered in this budget, and I look forward to future conversations. Thank you.
Commissioner Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the reserves that we keep, I know we had some discussion in the last budget about using some of those reserves. And I meant to ask this when we spoke last. What is that hard, fast number that would impact our rating, if any? Like, how does that, can you explain that for a second?
It's not particularly a dollar figure. What the rating agencies look at is a proportion, which is generally 20 to 25%. Communities, counties, cities that are rated AAA across all three generally have 20 to 25% reserves in proportion to their general funds.
All right, yeah, and we've been consistent there, obviously, and I know, I'm just thinking because there was discussion about tapping into it last time, that would then likely impact our rating, correct?
Well, we're currently at 24%.
Right, so if we stayed within the 20 to 24%, so say we were to use some of that for fire rescue or for whatever we determined, we would still, as long as we keep within that pocket there, we would be fine.
Generally speaking, and the rating agencies would look at something like, was it for a one-time use, because it is a one-time source.
But if it was more than a one-time use, say we did that 2 years in a row, we were at 20%, for example, we would still be okay. It wouldn't matter if it's a...
Well, I can't speak for the rating agencies, but generally speaking, they're looking for the 20 to 24%, and if it were to be declining, they would want some assurance that it's not for ongoing uses.
Got it. And on the, and just sticking on the public safety component of things here, can you pull the dates up again real quick, the date slide?
One moment. Now the computer is...
That's okay.
Thank you, yes. Speaking about the indigent care surtax?
No.
No. Oh, the calendar.
The calendar.
Okay, thank you. Calendar should be up.
Okay. All right, and I know we had the benefit my first year of Chief Jones presenting a master plan, and are we going to have some type of something that could be dedicated? The public safety component is such a big part of our budget, and for the public's purposes as well, because I want to make sure that us as a board, we are fully aware and that the public will be too of the needs of fire and police. So can you tell me, how's that going to fit into this calendar? Can you give me that information?
Right now, we don't have a tentative topic for that, but the board can certainly decide to have that, and we could come up with other dates.
Yeah, I think obviously we're not taking action today, but I think that would be very constructive. I know that the sheriff, I think, is going to need a lot more deputies, my understanding, up to 150 maybe over a period of time. And obviously, I would like to get at the ground level of the budget process for fire rescue as well. So, I'll probably bring that up. I don't know if I need to bring that up at a next meeting or through staff or maybe a combination of both. But I think that would be very constructive to have somewhere fit in there where, all the stuff's important, solid waste, indigent healthcare, all that. But I think that public safety really needs to be at the top of our list, especially since it's such a big part of our budget. So I think that would be very constructive. And then the courts, how are they fitting in exactly in this budget? They have a lot of new and different needs this time around, my understanding as well. So how are we going to get a lot of information regarding the court systems?
Well, the court, we receive budget requests from the court systems, and there are different officers and offices that are related to the court system each year. And we look at those as far as the recommended budget is concerned and such, and we keep track of future capital needs as well. So broadly in that manner.
Okay, good. All right, well, great. I appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you. Just a couple of points. First of all, Commissioner Owen, on the issue of the reserves, the thing that I think we've got to watch is that the bond rating agencies do have a component that is our management dependability. And I think if our trend ends up making it look like we're rating the reserves every year, that's when we I think could get into trouble. But I do agree with you. We may have a little bit of wiggle room because we've been on the high side for a couple of years. Commissioner Wustall, when you made the motion last year about the millage swap, my reluctance in supporting it was mainly that it came fairly late in the process, if I remember correctly. But I am definitely interested in having that discussion. I think I actually disagree with you. I don't think just districts 2 and 4 are the only ones that could potentially benefit or would disproportionately benefit. They do, but the unincorporated people in District 1 and I'm sure in District 3 have also the same underfunded infrastructure needs. So I think it would be welcome if we could find a way to buttress the unincorporated fund. The other thing is there is a benefit to the people in the incorporated areas in that they would get a small tax break under this scenario. So I definitely think it's something to look at. I am, would be concerned if we went for a huge number right away and destabilized the countywide fund, but your interest in perhaps doing something incremental is something I could definitely be interested in discussing. In terms of the indigent healthcare situation, we're going to have a workshop on it in May. But my understanding is none of us were here when it was passed, or adopted, I should say. And so I want to be very careful that we don't draw too many conclusions before we get a little bit more of an exposition of the facts of it. I'm very intrigued by the idea that some of the money could be used to pay for things that the county general fund is paying for now. And I definitely welcome that conversation. It seems like a combination of all these approaches might help us free up some dollars for some of the things that I know are weighing on us all because that we're behind, and we all recognize that. And this, I think, will be a good discussion. So thank you.
All right, excellent comments. So no other comments or questions. Bonnie, want to go on to the bond presentation?
Thank you. And thank you, commissioners. And it's a little unusual that I would be the one giving a presentation over here, but I have a unique background that I think most people don't have. I spent 16 years as an investment banker in the public finance world, and although I have an MBA in finance, being specialized in the public finance and issuance of municipal bonds and funding of capital projects is really a unique experience that most people don't have. And then, of course, I was the CFO for the city of Tampa, and then being here. So I have the advantage of being able to be on the private sector and in the public sector and finding creative ways to finance large-scale capital projects, and some big and small. So not to say that I'm getting older, but I do have a vast experience, so we'll start with that. And so what are municipal bonds? And although it has that funny title of municipal, because we think more of cities when we think of municipalities, but it's municipal bonds, or could be for states, they could be for counties, they could be for cities, special districts, that kind of thing. So it's really just that very term of art that we use. And it's a pretty complicated financing vehicle. It's really a loan, though, that local governments use to fund large projects. And similar to us in our private life, and we're going to go through an example, is we talk about a mortgage for a house. So it's basically a loan or a mortgage on a large capital project. So, but municipal bonds can be issued by the government on taxable or tax-exempt basis. So what does that really mean? That we're issuing bonds, it depends on what we're financing. Generally what we do, we issue bonds on a tax-exempt basis. But what it means is for the purchaser of the bonds, and the purchaser can be an individual, although municipal bonds have large denominations, minimum of usually $5,000, but it's also corporations, insurance companies who buy bonds. And it means that if they're tax exempt, that the purchaser of the bond does not have to pay income taxes on the purchase and on the interest that they're accruing. And so that means that the interest rate can be much lower because they, in fact, won't have to pay taxes on it. And so that's the nuance here of the ability to issue tax-exempt bonds. We issue those bonds for a set term of years, and then we can also refinance those. So a lot of times we'll come before you with refinancing opportunities, similar to if you want to refinance your own home mortgage. If rates drop, and you have the ability to save money. You have to consider certain parameters at the time, because like anything, any new loan has some costs involved, so you want to make sure that that outweighs the benefit outweighs any costs that are involved with that. And so we may refinance those bonds. Generally, municipal bond payments are made, the interest is paid semi-annually, twice a year, and principal is paid annually and through the maturity date of the bond. Usually the asset that we're financing basically matches the life of the asset and then the bonds. So I'll use like a car example. You wouldn't ever want to get a car loan for 25 years because that's not the life of the car. So just to be very extreme about it. But so you want to look at what you're financing. Is it a big utility project that's going to be there for 30 years or more? Or is it going to be something that's more short-lived? And you match that. We could issue bonds on a fixed rate or a variable rate. We have a commercial paper program that is a variable rate, but most of what we'll issue on for long-term bonds are on a fixed rate basis. So we know at the beginning what the interest rate's going to be for the whole duration of the bond issue. And that interest rate is going to be determined on how long the bond issue is, as well as the creditworthiness of the security that we're pledging toward repayment. Just as each of us has our own credit rating, bonds have a credit rating as well, and some revenue sources are stronger than others. Good? Okay. Hanging with me. This is a lot of years of experience that I'm trying to, get into a short period of time. There are various types of bonds. So the one that we talk about when we talk about our GO, or general obligation, this is our full faith and credit of our county. States have it, cities have it, the full faith and credit. In the bond world, we are governed by federal tax law as well as state law. In Florida, we are limited on our issuance of GO bonds, unless we can only issue GO bonds if there's a referendum. So for example, our ELAP bonds are GO bonds. They went to the voters for a referendum. However, another type of bond issue is a special tax or some specific dedicated tax, such as sales tax, half-cent sales tax, CIT, tourist tax. Those are considered a non-ad valorem revenue. It's not tax property taxes. And they could be pledged to the repayment of the bonds, and the rating agency will review that particular revenue stream as we issue those bonds. Another type is called covenant to budget and appropriate. Sometimes we group our non-ad valorem revenues together in a basket, basically, and we pledge all the non-ad valorem revenues. And then the rating agencies will review that. With any of these bond issues, however, there's certain parameters. So the rating agencies are going to look at what's called debt service coverage, how much revenue is coming in compared to your debt that you have outstanding. What are the operations that you need for your ongoing operations of your government? Because you can't have any of that too tight. And they're going to limit how much additional bonds we can issue in the future. Tax increment financing is generally for community redevelopment agencies. We as a county do not have any tax increment debt outstanding, but some of the cities do. Assessment debt. This is something that's used very frequently for community development districts when they're putting in the infrastructure in a new CDD, for example, and that's a very specific revenue source. We don't issue those bonds on their behalf. The CDD issues those bonds themselves. And then something that you all are probably most familiar with are revenue bonds, and that's like for our water and wastewater system, our solid waste system, where those bonds have that particular covenant to pledge toward repayment. Okay. On the next slide, we show what our current credit ratings are. And we go back to 2009 because that was the last year before Hillsborough County had AAA ratings from all three credit rating agencies. There's three rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch. You can see on this slide, there's a multitude of capital letters and small letters because they all have to have their own little variation. Some use ones and twos, some use pluses and minuses. But generally, the more A's, the better, whether they're capital or small. And you can see there that we have AAA ratings from all three credit rating agencies. There are about 3,000 counties in the nation, and about 40 have AAA ratings from all three credit agencies. So we are an elite group, and that is going to impact our interest rates that we for bonding. I will say, too, that companies look at what our bond rating is because they want to see the community in which they're going to bring some businesses to and what the employment base will be. Because it's not just the revenue stream that the rating agencies look at. They're looking at the whole economic environment of our county. They're looking at the employment base. They're looking at how does that compare to the state? How does it compare federally? What are the jobs? What is the employment rate? And all the economic conditions associated, in addition to specifically looking at that particular revenue stream. You can see there that our community investment tax bonds are rated in the AA category by 2 rating agencies and A1 by Moody's. Our water and wastewater bonds are very, very strong. We have AAA ratings by 2 credit rating agencies. And you can see over time how it's increased because it is a very solid revenue stream. We have invested in our infrastructure, and we have taken the steps necessary to provide adequate debt service coverage and to provide the water quality to our residents. Our solid waste bonds are not as high, still strong, but not as strong. It means that our revenue stream is not quite as strong as the water wastewater, and we have some large infrastructure needs that we have looming as well, but still in that AA category. The rating agencies will survey, they do what's called surveillance. We have a team. Now, on a day-to-day basis, I don't really issue the bonds anymore in this role. We have a team that works on a bond issue. So we have our partners in the clerk's office. We have our own debt team. It is an ongoing process. So when you issue bonds, we have financial advisors, a bond counsel, and disclosure counsel. There's a team that gets that done. But then even in between a bond issue, there's ongoing requirements for the secondary market in the bonds. We're required to provide our audits. We're required to provide ongoing debt service coverage. And the rating agencies from time to time will monitor and they'll update our bond rating accordingly. These are some comments that both Fitch and Standard & Poor's have made. And you can see there, the one from Standard & Poor's, the last one, says the rating reflects Hillsborough's strong, diverse, mature, and continually expanding economy. So we're very fortunate that we have been in this category. We're rated higher than the federal government in that regard. So now we're going to go into some math. If you could work with me on this one. And it's hard to talk about millions and millions of dollars, but we wanted to start with looking at somebody's home, like if somebody wanted to purchase a home. And I think people can relate to this a little bit more easily. And we're going to assume for this particular example that somebody's buying a house for $200,000. They have a little over $2,000 in closing costs, and they're going to look at whether they want to finance it for 10, 20, or 30 years. Now, 10, 20, or 30 doesn't have to be 10, 20, or 30. It could be something in between. But just for the sake of the math, we're going to keep it simple. But what you can see in each scenario where the interest rate is that if you finance it 10 years, the interest rate is going to be 5.79. Now, that's going to vary a little bit per person depending on their own individual creditworthiness. But this is basically where the market is at this time. If you're going to finance that house for 20 years, it's going to go up to 6.64 and then 6.87 for 30 years. So let's look at the 10-year example. If you are buying that house for 5.79%, the amount you're going to pay per month is just over $2,200 per month. However, during the whole life of that loan, the 10-year loan, you're going to pay $64,500 in interest over the course of that loan, and which making your total payments to $266,000. If you did that for 20 years, your payment, however, your monthly payment's going to decline. That's why people do this, to lower their monthly payment. However, their interest is going to increase a fair amount to $163,000. And then same for 30-year, it's going to lower your payment even further. And then you have an even higher interest expense. So every person has to decide what's best for them, for their family, and for their other expenses that they have in their lives when they're considering this. So that's our house example. So now we're going to say, but let's say we're Hillsborough County and we want to provide for a project that costs $200 million. So we had our $200,000 house. Now we're going to have this $200 million project. In the bond world, there's some significant some cost of issuance, and that's about a little over $1.5 million. And so we have to consider the cost of that. And so we're going to have to issue bonds of $201,565,000 in our example. However, our interest rates are going to be pretty significantly different than in our house example, because remember, this project is going to be like some capital project, some governmental project. We're going to issue tax-exempt bonds. We have a great credit rating. For a 10-year period, that's going to be about 2.87%. And as we go higher, 20 years and 30 years, you can see that the interest rate would be higher, just like in our house example. So for our 10-year, our average annual principal and interest on a mortgage, we look at monthly payments. Really, on the bond world, we look at see what it is on an annual basis. So we're going to pay $23.5 million per year in principal and interest. And then over time, our interest expense is about $32 million, bringing that $200 million project to about $233 million. Same thing for 20-year, 3.74%, brings it to 288 million, and 30-year, 357 million. And so you can see here where the interest rates are low, but they do increase over time depending on how far you want to go out. Once again, 10, 20, and 30, it's just generally 30 is generally the longest. We have issued 40-year bond. There can be circumstances where they're 40. Generally 30 is really more the max. But you can do 22. I mean, it's just somewhere in between. Okay, so we can go on. So we're going to talk about pay-as-you-go, where you're funding with just the revenues you receive each time versus the issuance of bonds. And bonding is only an option. And it really depends on what you want to finance and when you want to build it. And it really is a case-by-case basis. And there's not really a hard and fast answer. So in my municipal public finance world, in my previous life, bonding is not always the answer. You want to do some things on a pay-as-you-go basis. So I gave some of you this example. If you want to buy a microwave, you probably should go buy a microwave. But if you need a car, you may need to consider financing a car. However, you know, do you want to do it for 3 years? Do you want to do it for 5 years? Those are all decisions that you have to make, and you have to consider the costs that are associated with that. So bonding is only a tool, and it is not the right tool in every circumstance, only in some. So if we're going to go on the pay-as-you-go side, pay-as-you-go absolutely avoids all those issuance costs and those fees that are associated. However, if you're just going to try to wait to accumulate the money to buy a house, it may take some time, and so it may probably delay the cost of those larger purchases and those larger construction projects. And what we're seeing too in our inflationary times is that if we wait to build something, it is probably going to cost more. And in fact, the Highway Construction Cost Index has increased 82% over the last 10 years. Now, certainly the last few years have been extraordinary with our cost increases. But we pretty much expect that building something now is cheaper than building it into the future. And we're going to provide an example in just a moment. However, pay-as-you-go gives you much more flexibility. You could decide to change your mind, issue bonds, just use your ongoing dollars at any time and make your decisions for, at that time, what is the most important project at that particular moment. A lot of flexibility. However, on the bond side, it gives you the ability to immediately fund something that you might not otherwise be able to complete. And it accelerates economic benefits. So a new roadway could provide the ability to have other economic engines that get spurred from that particular investment. However, there are bond issuance fees and interest costs that must be considered in the analysis. It does spread the project payments over a longer period of time. So if your payment is lower, it does free up some pay-as-you-go dollars along the way, depending on how you structure the financing. And it does shield some capital projects from being canceled in the future. Once you issue the bonds, you're going to build the project, and it's going to be done. So we're going to go through an example here. And if you all can just work with me on all the on the bars and whatnot. So our first example, this is going to be a comparison of a 20-year, and we actually have added a 10-year, and we're going to show you after this. But on a 20-year example, we're going to compare 20-year pay-as-you-go versus a bonding example. And so under the bonding scenario, we know that it costs $14.5 million in debt service a year. So we're going to say that the construction cost of a $200 million project, that's the orange bar. And the construction cost in our example is going to increase 2.5% annually. That's probably a pretty low assumption. It probably is going to increase more than 2.5% a year, but for purposes of this, we said 2.5% a year. So you can see that your construction cost, the orange bar, is increasing over time. But then we're saying we're going to take, instead of issuing bonds for $14.5 million of debt service, we're going to take that money and we're going to set it aside. We're going to invest it. We're going to earn some interest on it. That's the gray bar. And how long do we have to keep investing that $14.5 million until the orange bar meets the gray bar? And in fact, it'll take us 17 years to fund that project. At that time, that project's going to cost $304 million in our example. Then you're going to build your project. Let's say it costs 3 years to build it. Then in 2045, that will have the benefit of that particular project. In years 2043, 44, and 45, you will have that $14.5 million that you can use towards some other projects as well once you get out there. If we issue bonds, we're going to issue the bonds now, and it's still going to take us 3 years to build that project, that $200 million project. And so we'll have 2029 in this example, where the benefit will accrue to the public for that project. However, we have to pay that debt service for the full 20 years. And so we're going to pay during that whole time period $288 million in principal of interest for those bonds. So for this case, this is just one example. Now, nothing is here to say you have to only set aside $14.5 million. This is just to keep it apples and apples. You can absolutely say you're going to fund this $200 million project over 4 years and set aside $50 million a year. That's a tougher, load, but it absolutely can be done. So let's say we wanted to do this only over 10 years. Could we fund this project over 10 years? And so on your pay-as-you-go example, we're going to set aside, in this case, $23.6 million, because that was the debt service for 10 years. And then when do the orange bars and the gray bars meet each other? It actually takes the full 10 years till you get there. But the project's not going to cost $300 million at that time. It's only going to cost $256 million. And then that's, that time period. And then on the bond side, we still issue the bonds now. We have the benefit to the public for the project, and we have to pay that debt service for the full 10 years. So that is an example of pay-as-you-go. Now, once again, it doesn't have to be 10 years, doesn't have to be 20 years. And if you have the discipline, I always say this like every time my car payment ends up, I'm going to take that money, I'm going to set it aside and keep, saving that car payment money. But then, you need a new AC and a new roof, and, so life gets in your way. So, but that doesn't mean that you can't have those discipline, but it also means that future boards may change the mind if you are, just trying to accumulate dollars. But there's a lot of flexibility, and I don't mean to, it is truly not a one-size-fits-all. It really needs to be looked at as just a tool in the toolbox for financing large capital projects. And that's what I have.
All right. Very thorough. Commissioner Wilstall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to give a different example that I think is the better picture for us to understand. And administrator-wise can fix me on any numbers, but we're expected to get $150 million as the numbers are right now after the breakouts, correct?
Yes, so the first year is about $200 million. So let's forget school board or any of that. We're going to get about 74%. So if you keep the math simple, about 150 is a good number to use.
Okay, and that's the number I use. So over 10 years, we would get $1.5 billion. We could make the decision as this board to go in and bond about 78% of that off the top. That would be able to bond 5 Lithia Pinecrests. We could bond 20 $50 million indoor stadiums, and we could bond about 10 gun highways. These are just flat examples. We can bond those out. We would get about $1,007.5 million. On that, we would pay about $160 million total of interest over the 10-year period, but we would still have about $332 million of pay-go money that we would be able to use for things that come up like the upper Tampa Bay Trail that we keep getting pictures of people smiling in front of because they want the bridge fixed, or the unexpected I mean, that's a real thing for everyone watching. That's the stuff that we get in emails, right? Commissioner and Hagan, I both get those the most. We could fund the PAYGO monies for the $2 million unexpected bridge. Morris, is it the Morris Bridge that you identified, Commissioner Hagan? Right. So we would have almost $1/3 of $1 billion left over for us to utilize as PAYGO funds for unexpected emergencies in this scenario. We would fully encumber the $160 million of interest that we would pay on bonding this is all based off of the 10-year lowest interest rate, which in my opinion, the interest rates for 20 years, 30 years, those are pretty significant changes when you're going from a $200 million bond paying $32 million of interest to upwards of $86 million under a 20-year scenario. That's a lot. I would like to see what our interest rates would be if our rating was slightly lower than AAA, by the way, just so we could really understand the full economic benefit of having AAA versus what's right below it. Is it A1 or AA? I don't know why they won't call it one consistent thing.
Yeah, I guess it's just their marketing. So this was not assuming that we were doing our full faith and credit. This was just assuming that it was probably CIT bonds. So we used the rating of the CIT.
The rating of the CIT.
Yeah.
I guess, so I hope that scenario, though, we could fund so many important things that could be up and going. We would not over encumber our annual $150 million. We would be able to fully pay the, according to these calculations, the average annual principal and interest payment of just one $200 million project would only consume $23.5 million of an annual $150 million that we're entitled to. So it's not like these numbers are going to take unrealistic chunks and then, yes, while $160 million of interest might sound like a lot to those folks, we're taking into account the rampant construction costs that have been increased, and we're not calculating the intangible benefit of us having these two major roadways improved in 3 years or 4 years rather than us trying to do it in 17 years. So that's the intangible benefits that we're not taking into consideration. And also, look, I don't want to be unrealistic. A lot of people, I have been pelted by a lot of constituents of folks that I wouldn't have believed would have supported an indoor sporting facility for travel ball, but these are folks that are the ones that contributing it and showing to me their annual bills. So I recognize that other people have different needs and they want that in this community, and it is a benefit that the taxpayers, feel like they're missing out on. And those are the types of items that we could fully pay for in a 10-year, and unless I'm missing something and I haven't found that example, there is no item that without us unnecessarily stealing money from the future in a 20-year tax that we couldn't quickly and rapidly get up to pace with a 10-year tax that we then, in 10 years from now, if any needs have changed, then whether if it's some of us that are still here as county commissioners, God forbid, me, not anyone else, then we could make that change again. Penny for Pasco has been renewed. 3 times, 10-year tax. That's our neighboring county. What is it? The Pinellas, I don't remember their quote one. It's a 10-year tax.
Penny for Pinellas.
It's also a penny for Pinellas. They don't tax their folks in the same, in my opinion, socialistic ways that we do. So our taxes are artificially higher off the top because of that. So they have more money for infrastructure, which probably answers, by the way, why Pasco is able to do things so much more quickly than us. But 10-year taxes, they renew them with ease every single time. I went back and looked. It didn't even look like close margins where they renew their penny for Pinellas and penny for Pasco. They spend their needs, they pay their debt, And that's exactly what we could do within those tax. So I hope that my example was helpful. Again, we could bond $1,007.5 million, fully pay the $160 million of estimated interest, and still have $1/3 billion left over in this scenario of leaving 22% of the $1.5 billion that we would get over 10 years available for pay-as-you-go emergencies. So thank you very much.
All right, Commissioner Owen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I know we're in a workshop. I mean, and first, thank you, everyone, staff, for putting this together. I think this has been, for me, really, really constructive. You know, my big issue on this, and the reason that I did bring this forward, is because we got to make a decision on the years for the referendum for the CIT. So for me, the big issue is what puts us in the best position to give us an ability to bond at competitive rates, assuming that we're a AAA rating. Does 10, does 20, does 30, does it make a difference in our ability to get a competitive bonding rate or to get bonding whatsoever? It's amazing how much bad information is out there on this issue. I mean, there's a lot of bad information out there. So that's kind of the big question. I know we're in a workshop here. Commissioner Wostel that was a lot, but from what sounds like good information. Bonnie, you know, as to my question, as we're making these decisions, you know, what would your position be on our ability to get, whether it's 10 or say 20 years or 30 years, what would that mean for us? If we make that decision to say 10 years versus 20, would that negatively impact our ability to get competitive rates and bond appropriately for, let's say, a road that's $212,500,000?
I don't really think that your answer is really a financial answer.
Okay.
Because we have the ability to issue debt for 10 years or for 20 years, and you are going to get very low interest rates regardless of your issuance.
Yeah.
So on the bond side, your creditworthiness is so strong, we're going to be able to do it. It really just depends how much you want to take on, what kind of projects. We know we have billions of dollars worth of needs, whether it's roads or bridges or whatever it is. So it's just, there's a lot of projects, and so it just would require you to choose, and you know how far out we can plan into the future. So I'm sorry that.
That's okay. Yeah, no, and you know, I think the good government here is obviously doing as much pay-as-you-go as you can, but smart bonding, right? From the business world, the most successful people I've seen in business, they understand, they know how to use credit, and they know how to keep their debt manageable, right? And that, in essence, is what we're doing. I think the biggest scam in the world is 30-year amortization. It's why banks are at the top of the buildings all over the cities, all over America. When people really realize how much they pay in a 30-year situation, using the mortgage example, it's usually shocking to people. They usually don't know that. But I just don't want my tombstone to read, "I hope the road got finished." You know, and I think that us coming up a way, I think that this it's really important, I think, for us as a board to really have a good bipartisan approach to the CIT, because in order for it to pass so we can fund these critical needs, I really do think that we all need to work together. And I think this is the first step, because I think from listening to our prior meetings that this has really been the big issue on the CIT, besides probably the schools. And I don't want to get in the weeds on that today because we're just talking about bonding. For me, the big challenge is determining whether the 10, the 20, or the 30 year is more appropriate, because one, I want it to pass, and two, I want us to be smart fiscally as far as how we spend our dollars here, and especially on some of these roads, because I just don't see how we get some of these major projects done without having the component of bonding. I just don't see how we do it. But on the other side of it, I want us to be as much pay as we go as we can. But flexibility, I think, is kind of the word here. To have the flexibility to make those decisions as a board, I think is going to be very critical. So I appreciate this presentation. I know it's been very helpful to me, and look forward to discussing it further. Thanks.
Commissioner Wostel?
Thanks. I should have pointed out that in my scenario, if we did $3 billion over 20 years and bonded it at the significantly higher interest rates, it wouldn't be a direct transfer of $160 million to $320 million in interest. That would be more of like compared to $160 million, that ratio would jump to about $600 million of interest if we bonded 78%, according to these interest rates are here, which is just unconscionable to me to even consider. So I think that that's an important point that I left out. Thank you.
Commissioner Kemp.
Yes, I just want to say that I think staff did a really good job putting that together to kind of explain the bonding versus pay-as-you-go and the impacts in terms of how we deal with our infrastructure or deal with this. So I think it was a good job, and I think there's, in terms of, it sounds like, I mean, if the overall big picture is, and I could differ a lot with the kind of all the facts that were put out there just now, but that everybody feels okay about understanding that certainly part of it would be bonded for however many years, 10, 20 years. But just in terms of the individual projects, I mean, we were, just to say, we were doing that without including the schools. So that's the maximum possible 150 million or so. I heard an indoor facility for travel ball, which is, I mean, I'd never even heard that as being a priority before for this money. So I'm not, is that the, what, is that even the, Commissioner Hagan, was that your project that you brought up, or is this something new that I'm hearing about?
No, there were two projects, either an indoor facility or a baseball, softball complex that the sports authorities in the process of doing, feasibility and cost estimates, but I'm assuming that's the one.
So that's 120 million or 115
we don't have
million.
the price. We don't have any information on the cost.
Right, and we hardly had any information, and I'll just say
it won't be cheap.
Yeah, and I wasn't supporting that going forward. I know I was the only one on the board not even going forward with that, because I do think we have other very serious financial priorities that we haven't put enough effort into. So I was surprised to hear that, along with Lithia Pinecrest and Van Dyke. But again, even if we brought 200 million as a starter for Van Dyke or Lithia Pinecrest at this point, this actually doesn't cover all that much. And we're not talking about all this, what Commissioner Owen has said, let's pre-plan and do all the roads for South County before we throw down the 10,000 homes that we were talking about last week that are being put forward, when we're not even dealing with the roads and transportation infrastructure besides Lithia Pinecrest and Van Dyke, if you're talking about this. So I'm just pointing out, in terms of priorities, and we still haven't talked about sewer and wastewater, we haven't talked about fire, and we haven't talked about the schools. And so I just want to put that out there in terms of priorities that I'm thinking about when I think about going forward. But I'm totally fine with the bonding, and I thought it was a good presentation, and that's just where I'm going with this.
Commissioner Cohen.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to add to what Commissioner Kemp just said, that we've got to remember that we've got to include the fire station and public safety needs in this as well. And that is going to be a big number. We've seen that the needs are really large, and we've got to have a placeholder for that in the calculations here when we're figuring out what the total dollars we're going to need to spend are. And I think that, we're at a place where our needs are so great that I do think that we need some front loading, because we've got so much catch up to do. And we have such critical needs, particularly when it comes to safety out on the roads. It's congestion, yes, and it's deferred maintenance, yes, but it's also safety. So those dollars, I think, do need to be spent quicker rather than later, and I hope that we'll factor that into our discussion next week.
Commissioner Owen.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be real quick. And I don't think, Commissioner Kemp, I think that some of the examples given were not necessarily us talking about priorities today, because that's not what today was about. I think they were kind of just examples. But I will say the board did vote, that East and South County roads are going to be prioritized. But I don't think that's, again, I think we're getting in the weeds today. This was about explaining the bonding process so that we as a board can collectively get a good understanding, because there's so much bad information out there, so that we can make make a decision on, this is specifically the reason that I wanted to bring this forward, is for us to determine the years when it comes to the CIT. We're going to all get an opportunity to talk about priorities and things like that at a later date. But I think as far as our focus here, and what I'd recommend to my colleagues here as a board, is for us to take this information in so that we can make a determination to put the right referendum forward. Thank you.
All right, I don't see anyone else in the queue. Just thought it was an excellent presentation, excellent discussion by board members, and to be continued at our board meeting next Wednesday. So, Bonnie, anything else you want to add? Okay, with that, we're adjourned.